November 11th, 1940. The Mediterranean trembles. The moon hung low over the harbor at Taranto, its silver glow dancing across the gently rippling waters. The night air was cool and thick with the salty scent of the Mediterranean. Anchored within the vast, steel-clad sanctuary of the harbor lay the pride of Mussolini's Regia Marina. 6 gleaming battleships, including the massive Littorio, whose armor was said to be impervious to any bomb or shell. Around them, a fortress of defenses bristled. 27,000 meters of anti-submarine nets stretched in invisible barriers beneath the surface, designed to snag and halt any underwater approach. 90 barrage balloons floated high in the night sky, their steel cables waiting to shred the wings off any daring aircraft. 300 anti-aircraft guns pointed skyward in menacing silence, their crews confident, ready to fill the heavens with deadly shrapnel at a moment's notice. The harbor itself was considered invincible, a citadel of steel protected by both man and machine. In his grand headquarters, Admiral Inigo Campioni, commander of the Italian battle fleet, exuded confidence. Reports had been delivered. Defenses had been checked and rechecked. Taranto, he assured Mussolini, was impregnable. Outside the walls of the Admiralty, searchlights swept lazily across the night, their beams slicing through pockets of mist. On the battleships, sailors played cards, shared cigarettes, and laughed quietly, safe in the belief that no enemy could touch them here. But across the darkened waves, moving low and silent just feet above the water, a different reality was closing in. 21 aircraft, slow, fragile biplanes, advanced through the night. Their canvas wings glistened with salt spray as they hugged the surface to avoid radar detection. Each was a relic of an earlier age, the Fairey Swordfish, known to British pilots as the string bag for its ability to carry almost anything, torpedoes, bombs, even supplies. Yet tonight, these outdated machines were carrying something far heavier than explosives. They carried the weight of history. Launched from the decks of the Royal Navy's carrier, HMS Illustrious, these 21 Swordfish crews flew through 170 miles of open water into the teeth of one of the most heavily defended anchorages on Earth. Their engines droned low and steady, the pilots straining to see through the mist, the navigators checking and rechecking bearings by faint glimpses of coastline and stars. Inside the cockpits, hands gripped throttles with knuckles white from tension. The men knew the odds. They knew how slow their planes were, how easily one burst of flak could tear them apart. They knew that many of them would not be coming back. Still, they pressed on. Among them, Lieutenant Kenneth Williamson, flying one of the lead Swordfish, peered ahead through the darkness and muttered a grim prayer under his breath. He could now see the faint glow of Taranto on the horizon, a glittering crown of lights atop what would soon become a battlefield. Behind him, the other biplanes held formation, their torpedoes slung beneath their bellies, heavy and eager. Each aircraft carried a single chance. One torpedo, one opportunity to cripple the enemy and change the balance of naval power in the Mediterranean. At that very moment, back in Taranto, Admiral Campioni signed off on his final reports and prepared to retire for the evening. He could not know, could not even imagine, that within the hour his fleet would lie broken and burning under the moonlight he so calmly admired. The Swordfish pilots throttled back to near stalling speed, dropping even lower toward the water. They were invisible now, mere whispers in the vast night. The Mediterranean trembled, not from the guns of great battleships, but from the silent approach of a few brave souls in fabric-covered planes about to rewrite the very future of naval warfare. The forgotten father of Pearl Harbor, long before December 7, 1941, before the world reeled at the carnage at Pearl Harbor, another admiral, on the far side of the world, had already proven how vulnerable mighty fleets could be. The forgotten father of Pearl Harbor, long before December 7, 1941, before the world reeled at the carnage at Pearl Harbor, another admiral, on the far side of the world, had already proven how vulnerable mighty fleets could be. His name was Admiral Andrew Cunningham, and on November 11, 1940, he made a desperate gamble that would forever change naval warfare, though history would largely forget his name. At the center of Cunningham's daring plan was the HMS Illustrious, Britain's newest aircraft carrier. The ship gleamed with fresh paint and modern innovations, an armored flight deck, more advanced radar. But she carried an air group that had never been blooded in real combat. Many senior officers doubted whether a handful of inexperienced pilots could punch through the dense ring of defenses around Taranto, let alone cripple an entire fleet. Their aircraft only added to the skepticism. The Fairey Swordfish was a relic by 1940 standards. A slow, biplane design draped in fabric and metal bracing, its maximum speed barely nudged 138 miles per hour, slower than many German bombers. Enemy pilots who encountered the Swordfish sometimes joked it looked like something left over from World War I. Its nickname among British crews was both affectionate and mocking. The string bag for its ability to carry almost anything like an overloaded shopping bag, torpedoes, mines, depth charges. Yet Cunningham placed all his hopes, and Britain's naval future in the Mediterranean, on these ungainly machines. The operation faced another near-insurmountable problem. The waters of Taranto harbor were shallow, no more than 40 feet deep in many areas. Normally, a torpedo dropped from an aircraft would plunge deep into the water before leveling out to run toward its target. In Taranto, the standard torpedo would simply smash into the muddy bottom, useless. So British engineers devised an ingenious solution. They attached wooden fins, makeshift aerodynamic dampeners, to the torpedoes. These wooden planes would force the torpedoes to skip or glide into the water gently, reducing the depth of their initial plunge and allowing them to stay at the correct height to strike the hulls of Italian battleships. It was a desperate improvisation, but it worked. Flying into history that night was Lieutenant Kenneth Williamson, one of the pilots who would deliver the first torpedoes against the Italian fleet. Decades later, Williamson remembered the grim humor among the Swordfish crews. They called us string bags. Our planes looked like something from the last war. We were flying into the teeth of modern anti-aircraft fire in open cockpits. But that night, we carried the future on our wings. The future he spoke of would reverberate far beyond Taranto. Because it was from this audacious raid that Japanese naval planners would draw inspiration for their own devastating attack against the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. 1 year later, almost to the day. Cunningham, commanding from the battleship HMS Warspite off the coast, knew the risks. If the operation failed, Britain could lose not only its newest carrier, but dozens of precious aviators, torpedo planes, and its last strategic advantage in the Mediterranean. But Cunningham understood something deeper. The age of the battleship was ending. The age of air power, delivered from carriers, was dawning. As he stood on the bridge, scanning the dark horizon and waiting for news, Cunningham was staking everything: reputation, strategy, the fate of Britain's hold over the sea, on a handful of fabric-skinned biplanes, a moonlit night, and the courage of young men barely out of flight school. In a few short hours, the world would change forever, though history would remember others for it. First wave. 2,100 hours. The surprised Taranto slept beneath a full moon, its calm harbor waters reflecting the lights of the anchored warships. A soft breeze carried the sound of opera broadcasts across the decks of the Italian fleet. Verdi and Puccini soothing crews who believed themselves invulnerable behind steel, guns, and endless layers of defenses. At precisely 2,100 hours, the night's serenity shattered. Skimming just above the wave tops, invisible against the moonlit ripples, The British Swordfish biplanes split into their assault groups like silent predators. The first element, the flare droppers, climbed steeply into the darkness before releasing magnesium flares that burst into life high above the harbor. A ghostly, unearthly white light flooded Taranto's waters, transforming the anchored fleet into perfect silhouettes against the shining surface, as exposed as fish in a glass bowl. Italian sailors, still half listening to their radios, looked up in horror as the night turned to artificial day. Then the torpedo attackers struck. Flying barely 30 feet above the water, the Swordfish pilots pressed their throttles forward and dove straight toward their targets. From that impossibly low altitude, at almost point-blank range, they released their torpedoes, the specially modified wooden-finned weapons, skipping into the water with barely a splash before racing toward the sleeping giants of the Regia Marina. In less than 90 chaotic seconds, history changed forever. The Conte di Cavour, one of Italy's proud battleships, shuddered as a torpedo slammed into her hull beneath the waterline. The explosion ripped through her compartments, flooding engine rooms and dooming her to settle into the shallow mud. She became the first battleship in history sunk by an aerial torpedo, a milestone no one aboard would ever forget or forgive. Moments later, the Littorio, pride of Mussolini's fleet, absorbed not one, not two, but 3 torpedo strikes. The force of the blasts tossed Admiral Angelo Iachino, the man, torpedo attackers. While the defenders' eyes were drawn upward to the flares, the real killers came in at wave-top height. Flying barely 30 feet above the water, the second group of Swordfish pressed home their attack with chilling precision. One by one, they released their specially modified torpedoes at point-blank range, aimed squarely at the proud behemoths anchored below. In the span of just 90 seconds, the balance of power in the Mediterranean shifted. Conte di Cavour, pride of the Regia Marina, took a direct torpedo hit near her bow. Water poured into her forward compartments as her massive frame groaned under the stress. She would never fully recover. Though refloated months later, she would spend the rest of the war rusting at a dockyard, never returning to battle. Littorio, Italy's newest and most powerful battleship, suffered catastrophic damage. 3 separate torpedo strikes ripped through her hull. One blast was so violent that it blew Admiral Angelo Iachino, one of Italy's highest-ranking officers, clean off the deck and into the flaming harbor below. Littorio's fires raged uncontrollably, spilling burning oil across the calm water, forcing nearby sailors to abandon ship or suffocate below decks. Oil storage tanks. Another torpedo smashed into the fuel facilities ashore. The resulting explosion ignited an inferno that cast the harbor into hellish brightness. Flames leapt into the night sky, painting the harbor crimson and black. Dense smoke rolled over the bay, choking defenders and attackers alike. In the middle of the chaos, leading airman George Wigginton, manning the rear gun of one Swordfish, looked out over the apocalyptic scene and later remembered, "The whole bay was on fire. Anti-aircraft tracers filled the sky like golden rain, but we were flying so low they couldn't depress their guns enough to hit us. It was madness, and somehow we lived." Italian gunners desperately filled the night with machine gun and cannon fire, but most of it soared harmlessly overhead. The British planes, battered and riddled with holes, pressed on, low, slow, and relentless. One Swordfish was hit and splashed into the harbor, but most returned to Illustrious intact, mission accomplished. In less than 5 minutes, the seemingly untouchable Regia Marina had been humbled, not by a fleet of battleships, but by a few dozen slow, fabric-winged biplanes, courage, and innovation. It was the first time in history that an entire battleship force had been crippled by air power alone. The world, though it did not yet realize it, had witnessed the birth of a new era in naval warfare. Second wave. Midnight. The hammer blow. While Taranto still burned and the stunned Italians struggled to organize a defense, the British Swordfish struck again. At the stroke of midnight, a second wave of biplanes descended from the darkened skies, low and fast, barely a whisper over the flaming harbor. This was the coup de grace. Though anti-aircraft guns were now fully manned and firing wildly into the smoky night, the Swordfish pilots remained undeterred. They ducked and weaved through curtains of golden tracers, using the glare from the fires to silhouette their new targets. Within minutes, the harbor erupted again in fresh chaos. Caio Duilio, one of Italy's oldest and most storied battleships, took a devastating torpedo hit near her magazines. The blast tore open her hull and flooded her forward compartments. As water rushed in, sailors fought desperately to save her, but gravity soon overwhelmed the ship. Listing heavily, Caio Duilio settled on the shallow bottom of the harbor, her proud guns slumped toward the waves. Littorio, already grievously wounded from the first strike, suffered additional torpedo hits. New ruptures flooded her engine rooms and further destabilized her listing frame. By dawn, the once mighty battleship lay half-submerged at her moorings, smoke still curling from her battered superstructure. Dockyards and oil facilities. The Swordfish also dropped delayed action bombs, ingeniously timed explosives designed to penetrate deep before detonating. Massive explosions shattered the nearby dockyards, destroying vital repair shops, fuel tanks, and ammunition depots. The infrastructure supporting the Italian fleet crumbled in a series of deafening blasts. Among the chaos, Italian sailor Ennio Caserta wrote in his diary by the flickering light of the fires, "The water itself is burning. Men are jumping from battleships covered in oil flames. It is the end of the world." British losses were surprisingly light. 2 Swordfish were shot down, with 2 brave crewmen killed in action, a tiny cost compared to the havoc wrought upon the Regia Marina. Aftermath. The balance of power shifts. By dawn on November 12, 1940, the Mediterranean chessboard had been violently overturned. The final tally was staggering. 3 battleships put out of action, 1 permanently crippled beyond repair. 2 heavy cruisers severely damaged, dockyard facilities gutted, Taranto harbor rendered unusable for months. Facing this devastating blow, the surviving elements of the Italian fleet had no choice. They limped away from Taranto, retreating north to the more protected port of Naples, abandoning southern Italy to British naval dominance. The British Mediterranean fleet, once outnumbered and outgunned, now ruled the waves. Admiral Andrew Cunningham, his faith in the Swordfish utterly vindicated, sent a simple, triumphant message to London. Taranto is no longer a base. But perhaps even more importantly, the world was watching. Among the observers was the Japanese naval attaché stationed in Rome. He immediately demanded access to all available battle reports, diagrams, and photographs of the raid. The intelligence he gathered at Taranto would be meticulously studied, and just 13 months later, its lessons would be applied with chilling precision at a place called Pearl Harbor. The age of the battleship was ending. The age of the aircraft carrier had begun. Its arrival heralded by 21 biplanes, a moonlit night, and the burning waters of Taranto. The old men who changed history. Taranto's legacy isn't just in the torpedo hits, the sinking ships, or the burning harbor. It's in the men who carried out the impossible, the ordinary pilots who defied the odds and changed the course of naval warfare forever. For the men who flew the Swordfish, age was a heavy burden, a cruel twist in the war's desperation. Average age, 32. In the high-speed, high-tech world of 1940 aviation, where many pilots were barely out of their teens, this was considered old for aircrew. But in that moment, the veterans of the Royal Navy would show the world that experience, not youth, would make the difference. These men weren't the cocky, polished, Brylcreem boys that had become the public image of the new modern air forces. They were the grizzled, often weathered sailors who had fought through the earlier battles of World War II. They had seen enough to know that guts, grit, and surprise could accomplish what cutting-edge technology could not. They didn't need the latest, fastest planes. They had what really mattered: the will to fight, the ability to improvise, and a history of seizing opportunities. The Fairey Swordfish, the plane they flew, was slow, outdated, and hardly the marvel of modern engineering. The fabric-covered wings creaked and groaned under the strain of the heavy torpedo they carried. Its maximum speed, just 138 miles per hour, was laughable compared to the sleek fighters of the Axis. Yet these old planes, with their stuttering engines and vulnerable frames, would deliver the blow that would forever alter naval strategy. For these men, their mission was a test of everything they had learned in their years of service: the need to adapt, using a slow, methodical strike when others might have relied on speed; the unwavering faith in their training, in their comrades, and in their ability to complete an impossible task; and above all, the surprise factor, the ability to strike with such precision and audacity that even the mightiest of fleets would be left floundering in disbelief. As veteran observer Arthur Mears put it, "We weren't the Brill Cream Boys, just regular Navy men who proved you don't need fancy machines when you've got surprise and guts." It was a statement that not only defined their victory at Taranto, but also captured the essence of a changing tide in the war. Sometimes it wasn't about what you had, it was about what you dared to do with it.